There were 3 of them, and they came in 2 cars, and the cars were the wrong kind of clean. That was the thing my mind kept snagging on, while a man I had never met stood in the gravel turnaround of a rancher's property and told me, in a voice with no weather in it at all, that the thing I had watched take my best friend apart the night before had not happened, and that the film in my camera had never been exposed, and that in a week I would have trouble remembering why I had driven all the way out to Cedar Creek in the first place. The cars were sedans, dark, and they had come up 11 miles of dirt road behind a logging outfit and a cattle operation, and they did not have one speck of dust on them. Not the hood, not the wheel wells, not the glass. I have thought about those cars more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life, because the thing in the trees I can tell myself I did not see clearly. The cars I saw fine. It has to go from the front, the way it happened, because that is the only way I know how to carry it anymore. In the fall of 1998, I was 31 years old, and I ran a 2-man operation out of a rented unit in a town I am not going to give you a real name for. And I would ask you to understand that I did that on purpose. The fictional names, all of them, because a real name with the wrong detail hung on it is how a man gets called a liar. And I have been called enough of a liar for one life. So the town is Halvers, the county is Aldous, the road out to the ranch is County 9, and the creek the ranch sat above is Cedar Creek, and none of those are on any map, and that is the point. The account is true. The names of the one lying it put there on purpose, and knowing that is the only way the rest of it can stand. The operation was called Nothing Official. On the message board we ran, it was just my initials and my partner's, and the phrase underneath, which I had typed myself one night 3 years earlier and never changed, said, "We investigate the unexplained and we do not charge." That last part is why we stayed a 2-man operation. There is no money in the unexplained unless you are willing to lie about it, and neither of us was willing. And that is a sentence I would have said with a straight back before Cedar Creek, and now say the way you touch a bruise to see if it still hurts. My partner was named Wade Corliss, and I had known him since we were 19. I want to put him down carefully because most of what comes later happens to his body and not to mine, and a man who is only a body in a story is not a man, he is a prop, and Wade was not a prop. He was the best friend I had. He was a big, slow-moving man with a black beard he kept for the warmth and not for the look of it, and hands that could fix anything with a motor in it, and a way of going quiet in a room full of people that made the people trust him without knowing why. He drove a 1986 Ford F-250 that he had rebuilt twice, and he loved that truck the uncomplicated way a man loves a dog. He had a daughter named Reese, who was 6 that fall, and who lived most of the week with her mother, 2 towns over. And Wade arranged everything we did around the 2 days a week he had her, and if a case ran long, he would drive 4 hours through the night to make her Saturday morning. And he never once complained about it, where I could hear he was not a believer. Exactly. I was the believer. Wade came along because I asked him to, and because he could not stand the thought of me driving out to some dark place alone and getting hurt with nobody there to drag me back to the truck. That was the whole of why he came. He came to drag me back to the truck. That was the whole of it, and in the end he was the one who did not get dragged back, and I have never found the bottom of that. Me, I was the one who kept the files. That mattered then, and it matters to how I tell this. I had a green metal cabinet in the rented unit, and inside it were manila folders, and inside the folders were the cases, and I numbered them, and the number was the thing. A case became real to me when it got a number. Before the number, it was a report, an email, a voice on the message board, a maybe. After the number, it was a thing that had happened, filed, and I could put my hand on it. I had grown up in a house where nothing was ever named. My father drank, and we did not call it drinking. My mother left, and we did not call it leaving. And I think a man who grows up in a house like that either learns to lie as easy as breathing, or he goes the other way entirely and becomes the kind of man who has to write it down, who has to number it, who cannot rest until the thing has a folder and the folder has a label, and the label is true. I went the other way. I became the kind of man who files, and the reason Cedar Creek broke me the particular way it did, the reason I am the way I am now, is that Cedar Creek is the one that would not go in the cabinet. They took it out of my hands before I could number it. To this day, there is no folder. There is a gap in the numbers where it should be, subject 9, and the folder behind that tab is empty, and I keep the empty folder, and my wife thinks that is the saddest thing she has ever seen a grown man do, and she is probably right. I should tell you what the work actually was, day to day, because the movies and the television have made people think this business is all night vision and screaming, and it was not. It was mostly driving and mostly disappointment and mostly kindness to frightened people, and I was good at the kindness part before Cedar Creek taught me the limits of it. We ran the operation out of a rented storage and office unit in a strip of them off the highway, cinder block, a space heater, 2 desks, my green cabinet, a coffee maker, and a corkboard where I pinned the map of the county with the cases marked. We did not charge, ever, which meant we both kept day jobs, Wade at a garage, and me doing books for 3 small businesses around town. Numbers, again, always numbers. I was a man who did other people's arithmetic by day and chased the unexplained by night, and did not think that was strange about myself until much later. The message board was mine. I had built it myself on a borrowed computer in the early days of that kind of thing, and people found it the way frightened people find anything. At 2 in the morning, typing the worst word they could think of into a search, haunted, and there we were. We investigate the unexplained, and we do not charge, and they wrote to us. 8 cases in 3 years had earned a number and a folder. I could name all 8 from memory, and I will not, but a few of them matter here, because they show the man I was, and the standard I held, and the standard is the thing that makes the night so unbearable. Subject 1 was, a woman convinced her dead husband moved her reading glasses in the night, and it was her, she did it herself, asleep, grieving, and I did not tell her that. I told her the truth of what I could not explain, which was nothing, and let her keep the husband, and drove home. Subject 3 was a set of cold rooms in a school that turned out to be a failed damper in the old ventilation, and I found it, and I was proud, because finding the boring true answer is the actual job. The ghost is almost never the answer, and a good investigator wants it not to be. Subject 6 was the one that came closest, before Cedar Creek, to being real. A hunting cabin where 3 different parties in 3 different years reported the same figure standing at the same window, and I never explained it, and it went in the cabinet with a number unexplained, which was the highest thing I could say about anything. Unexplained, filed, held. Subject 8, the one right before, was a farmhouse where a family heard a second set of footsteps come up their stairs every night for a winter, behind the last real person to climb them, and then in spring the footsteps stopped, and the family would not talk about it anymore. And I filed it, and I was uneasy about it in a way I did not examine, because Subject 8, I understand now, was the same thing as Cedar Creek wearing a quieter coat. Was the lid already down over something? A family that heard the second footsteps and then got a visit and then went silent. And I filed it as a haunting and drove home and did not let myself see that the going silent was the real event, and the footsteps were only what got in before the silence. I have wondered since how many of my 8 tidy folders are actually instances of the thing, dressed down, lidded, and how many frightened people who wrote to my little board at 2 in the morning were handed back their ghosts and their dampers and their grief by a well-meaning man who did not yet know there was anything worse to find. 8 folders. I was proud of my 8 folders. Cedar Creek is the 9th, and it is empty, and the empty 9th folder has taught me more about the full 8 than all the years of filling them. This is how it came to us. Most of what came to us was junk, and I mean that without unkindness. People's houses settled, and they heard a ghost. People got a divorce, and the grief in the house turned every cold draft into their dead marriage walking around at night. We got a lot of orbs, which are dust on a camera lens, and we got a lot of my grandmother's rocking chair moved, which is a house on a slope and a floor that is not level. And I answered every one of them politely and drove out to the ones that were close and free. And in 3 years, I had put exactly 8 numbers in the cabinet, because 8 times out of all those hundreds, there had been something I could not explain flat, and my rule, the rule I was proud of, was that a thing did not get a number unless I could not explain it. 8 numbers in 3 years. I thought that made me rigorous. I think now it just made me slow to understand the size of what I did not know. The Cedar Creek report came in September over the message board from a woman who signed herself only as R. She did not write like the others. The others wrote long, and they wrote scared, and they used the word haunted in the first line the way you use a coupon before it expires. R wrote 4 sentences. She wrote that she ran cattle on her family's place up in Albus County, and that for 3 weeks something had been coming down out of the tree line at the north edge of her property after dark and standing in her upper pasture, and that it was not a bear, and it was not a man, and it was not an elk, because she had shot and eaten all 3 of those, and knew them the way you know your own hands, and that her dogs would not go up to the north fence anymore, and one of them had stopped eating. The last sentence was the one that got me. It said, "I am not writing because I am scared, I am writing because I want to know what it is. And nobody I have asked will say, I read that 4 times, I want to know what it is." That was my own sentence. That was the sentence I had typed under my initials 3 years before. A woman I had never met had, without knowing it, written the exact reason I had started the whole thing, and she had done it in the flattest voice I had ever read on that board, a voice with no coupon in it at all, and I called Wade before I had even finished my coffee. He came over and read it off my monitor with his hands in his pockets, leaning down, the way he read everything, slow, moving his lips a little. Then he straightened up and he said, "That's a real one," just like that. Wade, who did not believe, who came along to drag me back to the truck, read 4 sentences from a cattle rancher and said, "That's a real one." And I should have listened to the thing in his voice when he said it, which was not curiosity. It was something closer to the way a man sounds when he recognizes a smell he cannot place and does not like. But I did not listen to that. I heard the words and not the sound under them, which is a thing I have gotten better at since listening to the sound under the words, and it cost me the only lesson I ever really learned to learn it. I wrote R back that afternoon. I asked her the screening questions. I asked everybody, the ones designed to make the junk fall away. Had she been under any unusual stress? Was there any history in the family of, and I chose the word carefully, of seeing things? Were there mine tailings or a gas well or high-tension lines anywhere near the north pasture? Because those will do strange things to a person's head, and I had learned to ask. She wrote back inside the hour, and her answers were short and level, and every one of them closed the door I had left open for the junk to walk through. No unusual stress beyond a thing standing in her pasture at night. No history of seeing things, and she added, without heat, that her people were not the seeing things kind. They were the kind who shot what needed shooting, and buried what needed burying, and did not talk about either. No mine, no well, no lines. And then she wrote one more line I had not asked for, and it is the line that put Cedar Creek in the truck and the truck on County 9. And it is the line I hear in the flat of her voice every time the power flickers in my house to this day. She wrote, "The last 2 nights it has come closer, and last night the porch light and the yard light both died while it was standing there, and came back on by themselves after it went, and I would like somebody to see it before it comes all the way to the house. The lights died while it was standing there." I did not know yet what that meant. I read it as a detail, one more strange thing in a list of strange things, the way you read the second to last clue in a mystery before you have any idea it was a clue. But I copied that line into a notebook, because I copied everything, and the notebook is one of the few things from that fall I still have, because it lived in my jacket and not in my camera bag, and the men and the clean cars did not know to ask for a jacket. I have the notebook open next to me right now. The line is there in my own hand, and under it, in a different ink, added days later, after, I have written 4 words that I do not remember writing, and that are as true as anything I know. The lights are the warning. We left 3 days later, on a Thursday, in Wade's Ford, because it rode better on dirt than my little Toyota did, with 2 cases of gear in the bed, under a tarp, and a cooler between us and the last good coffee either of us would drink without knowing it was the last good anything. It was a 6-hour drive to get up into Aldous County, most of it interstate, and then 2-lane, and then for the final stretch, the 11 miles of County 9, which was dirt and washboarded, and ran up through logging country that had been cut and left to come back wrong, all alder and scrub where the big timber had been, and then into cattle country that opened out into long gold pastures going brown with the fall, ringed on every side by dark second growth that stood up at the edges of the fields like a held breath. Wade drove. I read Amar's emails out loud off the printout, and the closer we got, the quieter he got, and I put the quiet down to the drive, to the 6 hours and the coffee wearing off, because I did not yet know what I later knew. That Wade had spent every one of those 6 hours getting closer to the country of his dead brother and closer to the shape he had seen at 17 and had never once described to a living soul, and that his quiet was not tiredness. It was a man walking toward a door he had been standing outside of for 14 years. The country changed as we climbed into it. The interstate gave out to 2-lane, and the 2-lane gave out to County 9, and the logged land came up on both sides, that particular ugliness of ground that has been cut and left, the big stumps gone gray, and the alder and the scrub come up between them in a tangle, second growth, the land trying to become itself again and not managing, and then that opened without much warning into the cattle country, the long pastures, gold going brown with the season, and around every pasture the dark wall of the timber that had not been cut, the real timber, standing up at the edges of the open ground the way a crowd stands at the edge of a thing. And I remember thinking in the last hour that the country looked like it was holding still on purpose, and then telling myself that was a thing a tired man thinks, and putting it away along with everything else I put away that fall. We crossed the actual Cedar Creek on a plank bridge about a mile from the ranch, the boards booming under the Ford's tires, and Wade slowed the truck almost to a stop in the middle of the bridge and looked up through the windshield at the tree line on the far side, and he did not say anything, and I said, "What?" And he said, "No birds." And I listened, and he was right. It was late afternoon in September in deep country, and there was not one bird, not a crow, not a jay, nothing. Just the creek going under us, and the tick of the Ford's engine, and the enormous held quiet of all that timber. And I wrote it in the notebook, "No birds," and I thought, that is interesting. And I did not think, that is register 2, that is the first door closing, because I did not have those words yet. I thought it was interesting. God help me, I brought a man I loved into that, and I thought the silence was interesting. The ranch came up on the left, where County 9 gave out into a cattle guard and a sagging wire gate, and past the gate the road became 2 ruts running up a low rise to a house and a barn and a scatter of outbuildings that had all been white once and were now the gray of wood that has given up on paint. R was standing at the gate when we came over the rise, like she had heard the bridge boom a mile back and known it was us, and she probably had. She was maybe 60, small, in a canvas coat and rubber boots, with gray hair cut short, the practical way, and a face that had spent its whole life outdoors and did not waste any of itself on expression. She opened the gate for us and closed it behind the truck and walked up to Wade's window, and the first thing she said, before hello, before her name, was, "You made good time?" And the second thing she said, looking not at us but back over the truck at the tree line to the north, was, "It will be dark in 3 hours, and I would like you set up before then, because I do not want either of you up at that fence in the dark before you have seen it in the light." Her name was Ruth. She gave it to us at the house, over coffee that was better than ours, in a kitchen that had a rifle by the door, and a police scanner on the counter turned low, and a child's drawing held to the refrigerator with a magnet. And I did not ask about the child, and she did not offer. And that was the shape of Ruth, a woman who gave you exactly what the situation required and kept the rest. She ran 300 head, she told us, down from the 600 her father had run, because she was one woman and getting older, and there was no one coming after her. And she said that without any grief in it. As a fact about the operation, the way she said everything, her husband had been dead 11 years. Her dogs were named Pete and Sal was the one that had stopped eating. And Sal lay under the kitchen table the whole time we talked, and did not come out, and did not thump her tail once. And every so often Ruth would reach down without looking and put her hand flat on the dog's side, and the dog would lean into it. And that was the only tenderness I saw in Ruth the whole time we knew her, that flat hand on a scared dog under a table. I asked her to tell it from the start, and I put my little recorder on the table between us, and she looked at the recorder the way she would have looked at a snake that was probably not venomous. And then she talked, and I am going to give you what she said close to the way she said it, because the flatness of it is the whole thing. The flatness is why I believed her when I might not have believed a louder woman. She said the first night had been 3 weeks back, a Tuesday. She had been closing up the barn after dark, which she did not like to do, but which had to be done. And Pete had started up barking at the north fence, the deep bark, the one that meant a thing and not a nothing. And she had walked up with a flashlight, expecting a bear, because it was the season for a bear to be filling up before the cold. And there had been something standing just inside the tree line, past the top wire, in the dark under the first trees, and it had been the wrong height. That was the first thing she said about it. And she said it 3 times over the course of the evening in exactly those words, the wrong height, and every time she said it, I understood it a little better and liked it a little less. It was too tall to be a man, she said, and it was standing the way a man stands up, on 2. Not the way a bear stands up, which is a thing a bear does for a second and then stops. This stood up. It stood up the whole time, and when her flashlight went across it, it did not do any of the things a living thing does when a light hits it in the dark. It did not freeze, and it did not run, and its eyes did not throw the light back the way an animal's eyes throw it back, green or gold or red. It just stood and let the light be on it, and then it took 1 step back, and the trees were around it, and it was gone, and Pete would not go up to that fence, and neither she found would she. I asked her what it looked like. Everyone always wants me to ask that first, and I have learned to ask it last, because the answer to what did it look like is worthless until you have the person's whole self in the room with you. And by the time I asked it, Ruth's whole self was in the room. She was quiet for a while. She reached down and put her hand on the dog. And then she said, "The thing that I have never gotten out from under, the thing that is the true center of this whole account," and she said it, looking at the tabletop and not at me. She said, "I have thought a great deal about how to say this so that you will not decide I am a foolish old woman, and I have decided I do not care if you decide that, so I will just say it. It was shaped almost right. Everything about it was almost the shape of something I would know, and nothing about it was the thing itself. Like somebody had heard a person described, very carefully, by someone who had also never seen one, and had made this out in the dark from the description." She looked up at me then. She said, "Do you understand what I am telling you? It was not a monster I could have shot. It was an almost, and I did not have anything to shoot an almost with." Wade had gone very still across the table. What happened in Wade's face when Ruth said that stayed with me, because I was watching him and not her at that moment, and Wade's face did a thing I had seen exactly once before, years back, when a doctor had come out to a waiting room where we sat and told a friend of ours that the tests were back and it was the bad thing after all. Wade's face went to that. He knew something. I did not know that he knew something. I found out later, in the truck, in the worst possible way, that Cedar Creek was not the first time Wade Corliss had heard a thing described as almost the shape of a person, and that he had come on this case not to drag me back to the truck, but because when he read Ruth's 4 sentences on my monitor, he had recognized them, and he had spent the whole drive up deciding whether to tell me, and he had decided not to, because he did not want it to be true badly enough to say it out loud, and that decision is on both of us now, and I have stopped trying to give it back to him. We sat up before dark, the way Ruth asked. What we carried matters, because the gear is where the second part of it started, and because the gear is the part the men in the clean cars were most interested in. And I have come to think the gear is the closest thing to proof that any of it happened, even though they took it, because of the way it behaved. We ran 2 cameras. One was a shoulder mount video rig that shot to tape, a good one, the best thing we owned, and the other was a 35mm still camera loaded with fast film for the low light. We had a directional microphone and a reel-to-reel to catch sound. We had 2 of the electromagnetic field meters that everybody in this business carries, the handheld kind with the needle that are supposed to twitch when there is a field around, and that mostly twitch when you wave them near a fuse box and mostly sit dead the rest of the time. We had flashlights and a big lantern and 2-way radios so we could split up and stay in contact. We had a thermometer, because cold spots are a thing people report and it is cheap to check. And we had, because Wade insisted on it every single time I used to tease him about it, a paper map and a compass, real ones. Because Wade did not trust a thing that ran on a battery to tell him which way was out. I teased him about the compass on the drive up. I have sat with that a long time since. I teased him about the one piece of equipment that would have saved us both a great deal if we had understood in time what it was quietly trying to tell us, and Wade took the teasing the way he took everything, with a little tuck at the corner of his mouth, and he clipped the compass to his belt anyway. Ruth walked us up to the north fence and the last of the light. It was maybe 400 yards from the house, up the long slope of the upper pasture, and the grass was cropped short and gold, and the fence at the top was a 5-wire with cedar posts gone silver, and beyond the fence the ground kept rising into the tree line, the second growth, dark inside past the first few trunks, the way those woods always are. Ruth stopped at the fence and did not touch it. She pointed to a spot just inside the trees, a little to the left of a leaning post, and she said, "There, that is where it stands. Not another spot, not roaming. There. The same 3 feet of ground every time, like it has got a mark on the floor." And I looked at the spot, and there was nothing to see, just dark between 2 trees, but Sal, who had followed us up the slope at a distance with her tail down, would not come within 30 yards of that fence. And she sat down in the grass with her whole body pointed at that spot, and she made a sound I had not heard a dog make before. Not a growl and not a whine. A kind of low, steady note. And Ruth said, "That is new." And we all stood there and listened to a dog hold one note at a patch of empty dark while the light went out of the sky. The gear was the next thing. I had one of the field meters in my hand. Out of habit, not expecting anything, the way you carry an umbrella on a day that might be fine. And as we stood at the fence, in the failing light, with the dog holding her note, the needle on that meter came up off the pin, not a twitch. It came up smooth and steady, a quarter of the way across the dial, and then a third, and it held there. And I looked at it, and I looked up at the tree line, and there was nothing there. Nothing I could see. And I thought, dead battery. They read wrong when the battery goes. And I said that out loud. I said, "Battery's going on this one." And Wade looked over at the meter in my hand, and then he unclipped the second meter from his own belt. The one with a battery I had put in fresh myself that morning in the motel. And its needle was up in exactly the same place, a third of the way across, holding 2 meters, 2 batteries, the same reading, at a fence in an empty pasture with the light gone gray and a dog singing one note at nothing and no fuse box for 400 yards. Wade held his meter up next to mine, so the two needles stood side by side at the same place on their two dials, and he looked at me over the top of them, and he did not say anything, and neither did I. And Ruth watched the two of us look at each other, and she said, in that flat voice that never once in 3 days rose or fell, well, so it is not just me and the dog. And she turned and started back down the slope toward the house, in the near dark, sure-footed, not hurrying, and Wade and I stood one more moment at that fence with the two needles up, and then the needles dropped, both at once, back down to the pin, dead flat the way they were supposed to be. And the exact instant they dropped, the dog stopped singing and stood up and shook herself and trotted off down the slope after Ruth, like something had let go of her. And the birds, which I had not registered, were still absent. The birds came back, all at once, up in the trees, the ordinary evening racket of them, like a radio turned back on. Wade looked up at the sound of the birds, and he said, quiet, more to himself than to me, it left. And I said, what left? There's nothing there. And Wade looked at me with an expression I did not have a name for then, and have every name for now. And he said, that's right, there's nothing there now. And he walked down the slope after the women, and I stood at the fence alone for a second longer than I should have. And I wrote in the notebook, both meters, 1/3, simultaneous, and then dropped, and I did not yet write the thing I know now, which is that we had just watched the whole rule of it, the entire law that governed the thing at Cedar Creek, laid out plain in two needles and a dog and a flock of birds, and that if I had been the man I thought I was, the rigorous one, the one who filed, I would have read the law right there at the fence in the last light and put Wade back in the Ford and driven us home. The reading was mine to make. I had all of it. I just did not know yet that the flicker was the thing itself, arriving, and the stillness was the thing itself, gone, and that everything alive in that pasture knew the difference in its body long before the two of us with our meters and our tape and our college educations worked out that the animals were the instrument and we were just carrying spare parts. We ate dinner at Ruth's table. She would not hear of us cooking on the tailgate, and I think now she wanted the company in the house with the dark coming on, though she would have died before she said so. She made us elk steak and potatoes, and she talked a little about the country, the history of it, the way the timber outfits had come and cut and gone, the way the young people left, and it was ordinary good talk. And it was the last ordinary hour any of the three of us would have, and I have gone back over it many times looking for the seam. The moment the ordinary hour ended and the other thing began, and the truth is there was no seam. It just got dark outside the kitchen window, the full dark, and at some point in the talk I realized that all three of us had started glancing at that window, at the black rectangle of it over the sink in the pauses, and that Sal had come out from under the table and was standing in the middle of the kitchen floor with her legs braced and her eyes on the window and her hackles up in a ridge from her shoulders to her tail, holding that low note again. And none of us had noticed the exact moment she started, and Ruth stood up from her chair without a word and reached up and turned off the kitchen light so that we were sitting in the dark in the glow of the scanner, and she said, "Get to the window, quiet, do not put a light on, it is early tonight." And I looked at Wade, and Wade was already up and moving toward the glass with the slow, careful economy of a big man who has decided to be somewhere, and I went with him. And that is where the first night truly started. The two of us at a dark kitchen window with a rancher and a shaking dog, looking up a black slope toward a fence we could not see, and the field meter that I had set down on the counter by the scanner out of my hand, forgotten. Its needle came up off the pin in the dark, all on its own, and began, slowly, to climb. We watched the needle climb in the dark, and none of us spoke. The waiting was its own thing, and the accounts always skip it and go to the sighting, and the waiting was worse than the sighting in a way, because, in the waiting, your own mind does all the work. The kitchen was dark except for the green of the scanner and the faint glow off the meter face, and the three of us were at the glass. And outside there was the yard, and then the black slope going up to the blacker tree line. And nothing moved out there, nothing at all. And the meter climbed. And that was the horror of it, that the instrument said a thing was coming, and the eye said the night was empty. And the gap between those two, the gap where you stand knowing something is close and being unable to find it, is a gap the mind fills with everything it has. And my mouth had gone dry, dry as the circle I did not yet know about. And I stood at that glass tasting the penny taste of my own fear and watching a needle climb toward a thing I could not see. And Sal held her one low note, and the note was the worst clock I have ever stood next to. Because as the needle climbed, the note climbed with it. A hair, the dog and the meter agreeing, rising together toward something. And Wade beside me had gone as still as I would later learn to dread him being. And Ruth on my other side breathed slow through her nose, on purpose, the way you breathe when you have decided not to run. Then Wade put his hand on my arm and pointed up the slope, and I looked where he pointed, and at first there was only the dark, the pasture a shade lighter than the tree line above it. And then I found it the way you find a thing your eye keeps sliding off of, and there it was, up at the fence, standing where Ruth had said it would stand, a little left of the leaning post. I could not have told you one true detail of it. It was a darker place in the dark, upright, tall, and the wrongness of it did not come from anything I could see because I could not really see it. It came from the way the eye refused to hold it, the way you cannot look straight at a faint star and have to catch it off to the side. Every time I put my eye right on it, it thinned out into just more dark, and every time I let my eye drift it assembled again at the edge of my sight, upright and too tall, and facing the house, facing us. I could not see a face, and I knew it was facing us the way you know in a dream which way a thing is turned. Ruth breathed out slow through her nose beside me and said, "There." And Wade said nothing at all. And the needle on the meter by the scanner stood at half inclined, and I understood, standing at that glass, that the closer the needle came to the far pin, the closer the thing was to the house, that the meter was not detecting the thing so much as it was the thing, that the wrongness the thing carried leaked into every wire and coil and battery around it and bent them, and that I was watching the bend and calling it a reading. Then the kitchen light came on. It came on by itself, the overhead, the one Ruth had switched off, blazing on full and buzzing, and all three of us flinched back from the window. And the scanner shrieked with a wash of static, and the refrigerator behind us groaned, and its motor climbed to a pitch a refrigerator should not reach, and the meter needle slammed all the way over to the far pin and stayed there, hard against the stop. And for 1 second the whole kitchen was a box of light and screaming machines. And Sal broke. The dog broke and ran, scrabbling on the linoleum, back down the hall into the dark of the house, and Ruth said a word I will not put down, and then, as fast as it came, it stopped. The light went out. The scanner dropped back to its low mutter. The refrigerator sighed down to its ordinary hum. The needle fell off the pin and dropped to dead. And up at the fence, when I got my eye back to the glass and found the spot, there was nothing. Just the leaning post in the dark, and a moment later, the ordinary small sounds of the night coming back, an owl somewhere, the wind, the creek. It was gone, and it had left the way it always left, taking the wrongness with it, and leaving 3 people, and a hidden dog in a kitchen that smelled faintly of hot dust and something else under the hot dust, something I did not have a word for that night, and that I now know was ozone. The smell of the air after lightning, the smell of a great deal of energy passing through a place that was not built to carry it. Nobody slept much. Ruth made coffee at 2 a.m, and we sat up with it, and she told us in pieces, over that pot and the next one, the part she had not put in her 4 sentences. That it had started at the fence, and each night stood a little further down the slope. That 2 nights back it had been halfway to the house. That the night she wrote me it had reached the yard. She had not put that in the email, in those words. She had written that the yard light died while it was standing there, and I had read that as the thing standing up at the fence and the light dying at that distance, and she Let me see now, that she had meant the thing was in the yard, 40 feet from her kitchen door. When the light over her own back step died and she stood on the other side of a locked door she knew would not matter if the thing wanted in, and watched it be almost the shape of a person in her own yard, and then watched it not be there. She told us this the way she told us everything, flat, and at the end of it she said the only thing she ever said that had a crack in it. She said, "I have lived on this place my whole life, and I have never once been afraid of the dark on it until now, and I am too old to learn to be afraid of my own dark, and I would like you to find out what it is so I can stop." There was one more thing Ruth told us over that 2 o'clock coffee, and I've gone back and forth for years on whether to include it, because it is the thing that should have frightened me most, and frightened me least at the time, which is a sign of how badly I was reading everything. She told us that her father had a story, that when she was a girl, in the 1940s, her father had told her once, only once, drunk, which he rarely was, about autumn when he was young, before Ruth, when a hired man on the place had gone up to the north fence after dark to fix a break in the wire and had not come back, and had been found the next day sitting against a cedar post inside the tree line, alive, unhurt, but wrong, sitting and staring and not answering, and had stayed wrong, had never worked again, had been sent to a state place eventually and died there, and Ruth's father had said, the one time he said it, that there had always been something up at that north corner, that his own father had known to keep the stock off it, that it was a bad piece of ground that went bad every so often for a season and then went quiet again for years, and that the family rule, passed down and never written, was that you did not fix wire up there after dark. You waited for morning. Always. The wire could wait for morning. And Ruth had grown up with that rule and never questioned it and never had cause to, because in her 60 years the north corner had been quiet until this fall, when it woke up again after being quiet her whole life. And she had not connected it, she said, not until she was saying it out loud to us at her own table at 2 a.m, that the thing standing in her pasture was the same bad ground her grandfather kept the cattle off of, that it had a history longer than the house, that it came and went on a clock too slow for one life to see, a season every few decades, and that she was the first of her line in 100 years to invite men up to the north corner after dark instead of waiting for morning. And she looked at the two of us when she understood that, and she said, "I broke the rule. My people had one rule about this place, and I broke it because I wanted to know." And she looked at me when she said wanted to know, because it was my words, our words. And I understood that Ruth and I were the same kind of fool in the end, the kind who cannot let a thing alone, who has to know, and that the wanting to know was the door we had both walked through, and that Wade, who did not want to know, who only wanted his brother back, was the one it was going to reach, and there is no justice in that, none. I have looked for it for 25 years, and there is no justice in who it reaches, only the plain fact that it reaches whoever is nearest the door when it opens, and that night that was Wade. And Wade, across the table, said, "We will." He said it quiet, and he said it like a promise a man intends to keep. And it is the last promise I ever heard Wade Corliss make, and he made it to a woman he had known for 9 hours, about a thing he already half understood was going to cost more than either of us had, and he made it anyway, because that was the kind of man he was, and I loved him. And I have to keep saying that because the story from here on is mostly about what happened to his body, and the man is the thing to hold on to through it, the man who made the promise, not just the body it happened to. It was in the truck, near dawn, that Wade told me his part. We had gone out to the forward around 4 to get the second cases of film and to sit somewhere that was not that kitchen for a few minutes, and we sat in the cab with the doors shut and the heater running and the windows going gray with our breath. And I was high and jittery, the way you get after no sleep and too much coffee and a thing you cannot explain, running my mouth about fields and frequencies and what we might catch on tape the next night, making it into a puzzle, making it into a case, doing the thing I do, filing it while it was still happening. And Wade let me run for a while, and then he said, "Real quiet, Danny." which was my name, is my name, Daniel, but Wade was the only one who ever cut it to Danny, and he only did it when a thing was serious, and it stopped me. And he said, I have to tell you why I came on this one. And he told me when Wade was 17, up in the country where he was raised, 2 counties over from where we sat, his older brother Cole had gone out one November night to run a trap line along a creek at the back of their family's land and had not come back. Search went on a week. They found his rifle and they found 1 boot, and they never found Cole, and the county wrote it up as a fall into the creek, drowned, body carried off, which happened up there, which was a thing that happened. But Wade, who was 17, had been the last one to talk to Cole, had walked him to the edge of the field where the trap line started, and Wade had seen, standing back in the trees at the tree line where Cole was headed, in the last light, a shape. And he had told Cole there was somebody back in the trees, and Cole had looked, and Cole had said, that's no somebody, that's the wrong shape for a somebody, and had laughed, because Cole was 19 and afraid of nothing, and had gone in anyway, lifting a hand to Wade over his shoulder without looking back, and that was the last anyone saw of Cole Corliss. A raised hand, and his back going into the trees toward a shape that was the wrong shape for a somebody. Wade had never told the searchers about the shape. He was 17, and it sounded insane, and he had half convinced himself he had made it up out of grief. But he had not made it up, and he had known he had not made it up, and for 14 years he had carried a dead brother and a shape in the trees and told no one. And then one September morning he had leaned down over my monitor and read 4 flat sentences from a rancher 2 counties from where he grew up about a thing that was the wrong height and the wrong shape for a person, standing at a tree line at the edge of a field, and he had known it was the same thing, or the same kind of thing, and he told me in the gray cab with the heater running not to drag me back to the truck this time. He had come because he had spent 14 years wanting one more look at the shape that took his brother, and here it was, and he could not come. I have never understood a decision better in my life, and I have never wished harder that a man had lied to his best friend and stayed home. I did not know what to say to him. I am ashamed of what I did say, which was that I was sorry, and then, God forgive me, that this changed things. That if it was the same phenomenon across 2 counties and 14 years, then this was bigger than a single haunting, that this was a pattern, that we needed to document it properly. And I heard myself pulling the notebook out of my jacket in the dark of the cab to write down the details of Wade's dead brother, and Wade watched me do it, watched my hand go for the notebook while his brother's boot was still lying in the country of the thing I was so excited to file, and he said, and there was no anger in it, which was worse than anger, he said, "That's what you do, isn't it? You put it in the book so it can't put anything in you." And I stopped with the notebook half out of my jacket, and I did not have an answer, because he was exactly right. He had seen the whole architecture of me in one sentence at 4 a.m. The filing as a wall, the number as a way to hold a thing at arm's length so it could not get in, and the awful part, the part I have had years to sit with, is that I put the notebook away, and I felt the loss of it. I felt naked without the wall, and some part of me was already reaching for the next thing I could file, so I would not have to just sit in that cab and be a man whose best friend had a dead brother and a fresh reason to grieve him. I put the notebook away and I said, "Tell me about Cole. Not for the file, just tell me." And Wade did, until the sky went from gray to the pale nothing color of a fall dawn, and it was the best hour I ever spent with him, and I bought it with the worst version of myself. And that is the thing about Cedar Creek. I have never told anyone, not the men in the cars, not my wife, and I am putting it down now, because if I am going to set the rest down true, I do not get to leave out the part where I was at the exact center of my friend's grief, still trying to find something to file. We slept a few hours that morning in the truck and in Ruth's spare room, in shifts, and we spent the daylight the way you spend daylight when the dark is the thing you are waiting for, which is to say badly, half of us always watching the angle of the sun. Wade slept hard. the sleep of a man who has set something down at last, and I did not sleep at all, and I walked the north fence in the full light with a camera, alone, which Ruth had told us both not to do. And what I found up there in the daylight is the middle rung of the thing, the accumulation, the place where a rigorous man should have turned around, and I did not. I had gone up alone against Ruth's word because I could not sit in the house. That was the truth of it. The daylight after the first night was long and bright and useless. A hard blue September day with the pastures gold and the timber black-green, and not one thing about it that looked like the country that had held a shape at a window 9 hours before, and Wade slept, and Ruth did her chores because 300 head do not stop needing water for a woman's bad night, and I was left alone with the daylight and the thing I do, which is I could not let it sit unfiled. There was a wrongness up that slope, and I had a camera, and the sun was up, and every rational bone I had told me that whatever came in the dark was gone in the light. The meters had proven it. The thing arrived and departed and took its wrongness with it, and in the daylight the fence was just a fence. So I told myself I was being rigorous. I told myself I was documenting the site under safe conditions. I have noticed that the word rigorous and the word reckless can describe the very same walk up the very same slope, and that the only thing that decides which one it was is what is waiting at the top, and that a man does not get to know that in advance, and that I have spent my life confusing the courage to look with the compulsion to file, and I still cannot always tell them apart. I went up the slope with the sun on my back, and Sal did not come with me. Sal watched me go from the porch with her head down, and I reached the fence, and I climbed through it, through the 5 wires, which I had not done the night before, and I went the last few yards into the tree line, into the shade, where the temperature dropped the way it drops when you step into old timber, 10 degrees, and the sound changed. The open pasture sound of wind and grass giving way to the closed sound of the woods, which is mostly no sound, which is the sound of a lot of standing trees holding still. And I found the spot without any trouble because the woods told me where it was. The salal and the sword fern grew thick and green over every inch of that ground, waist high in places, and then, in a rough circle, they did not. The spot inside the tree line, the 3 feet of ground where it stood, was bare. Not trampled, not scorched, nothing so dramatic. Bare. The salal and the fern and the moss that covered every other inch of that forest floor stopped in a rough circle, maybe 4 feet across, and inside the circle there was only dirt, gray dirt, and the dirt was dry. That is the detail. It had rained 2 days before we came, a hard fall rain, and the whole forest floor was still dark and wet with it, and springy underfoot, and this one circle of dirt was dry all the way down when I put my fingers into it, dust dry, the way ground gets under a thing that has stood over it for a long time, a car parked for a season, a woodpile left too long. Something had been standing in that spot long enough and often enough to dry the ground under it, and around the dry circle the ferns that leaned into it were brown at the tips, curled, the way a plant curls toward a heat source, except there was no heat. The circle was, if anything, colder than the woods around it. I could feel the cold come up off it into my hand. That was the first thing I could not make fit any category I had, and I crouched there turning it over, because the thing that dries the ground and browns the ferns should be hot. That is a burn. That is what heat does, and this was cold. Cold coming up out of dry, scorched-looking ground, and the 2 facts would not sit together in my head. Dry like heat and cold like a cellar. And I understand now that I was looking at the footprint of something that did not obey our physics at all, that the wrongness it carried did not map to hot or cold or wet or dry the way our world's forces map, that it simply did things to matter that looked like our effects and were not our effects, and almost, again, an almost burn that was really a cold, the same way it was an almost person that was really a nothing, and that everything about it, its body and its heat and its face, and the man it left in Wade's chair, was our vocabulary stretched over something that did not speak our language, a translation with no original, and that a man could go mad trying to make the translation resolve, trying to make the ground be hot because it was dry or cold because it was cold, when the truth was that our words for what happens to ground simply did not reach the thing that had happened to this ground. I put my whole hand flat in the center of the dry circle, which I should not have done, and the cold that came up into my palm was not the cold of shade or the cold of the creek. It was a cold with no bottom to it. A cold that did not warm to my hand the way even very cold things warm a little to a hand held on them. It just took the heat out of my palm and gave nothing back, the way the almost eyes took the flash and gave nothing back. And I pulled my hand out of the circle, and my palm was white and stayed white and cold for an hour after. And I stood up and backed out of the tree line into the sun, and stood in the gold pasture in the warm light, rubbing my dead white hand and understanding, for the first time all the way, that I was not investigating a haunting, that I had no folder that this went in, that whatever stood in that circle at night was not on the map of things my green cabinet was built to hold. Dry ground and burned-looking ferns, and a cold coming up out of it, and I crouched there in the wet woods with my fingers in the one dry place, and I did not think, run. I thought, photograph this, and I did. I shot a whole roll of that circle from every angle, and not one frame of that film came out. When it was developed, later, by people who were very good at developing film, every frame of that roll was fogged edge to edge, a gray nothing, exposed, as if the roll had been pulled out into the light, except it had not been. I had loaded and unloaded it in a changing bag with my own hands. The thing's wrongness had gotten into the film through the camera body the way it got into the meters, and it had wiped every frame of the one piece of hard proof I tried hardest to make. And if I had understood that at the circle, that the thing unmade any record you tried to make of it, I might have understood what was coming when we tried to make the biggest record of all the second night. But I did not understand it. I just knelt in the wet woods and photographed a dry circle and felt, God help me, like a scientist. The rest of that second day went slow and wrong in the way a day goes when you are waiting for the dark and pretending you are not. Wade woke around noon, rested, easier in himself than I had seen him in years, the confession having let some long-carried thing out of him. And it is a cruelty I still choke on that. The best I ever saw, my friend, the lightest, the most unburdened, was the last afternoon he was ever fully himself. That the thing lifted off him at noon and came for him at 9:40, and that he spent the 6 good hours in between being kind to me and to Ruth and fixing, without being asked, a thing that had been wrong with the compressor on Ruth's stock tank for a year, lying under it in the dirt with his tools laid out on a rag in a row the way he laid them out, whistling, while I stood in the yard and watched the tree line and told myself the meters would warn us, the meters would always warn us, we had time, we had all the daylight. Ruth cooked again, and we ate early, and the talk was thinner than the first night, everyone saving themselves, and Sal would not settle. Sal paced the kitchen and went to the window, and came back and went to the window, hours before dark. And Ruth finally put her outside because the pacing was more than she could sit with. And then we all watched Sal through the window, pace the yard instead, nose up, reading something on the air we could not read. And Ruth said, she knows it is a bad one tonight. And I asked how a dog would know that in the afternoon. And Ruth said, the same way she knew before I did every night. They are just built closer to it than we are. And I wrote that in the notebook, built closer to it, and it is one more line I did not understand was the whole truth, until later. The animals were the instrument. We kept saying it to each other without hearing it. The dog was the meter that worked. The dog had been trying to tell that pasture something for 3 weeks, and the only people who would listen had to drive 6 hours and bring machines to confirm what a stock dog had known in her body the first night. And even then, we trusted the machines over the dog. And the machines lied to us, and the dog never did. And if I have one thing to say to anyone who ever finds themselves at the edge of a thing like this, it is, watch the animals, watch them and believe them, and do not wait for a needle to agree with them, because by the time the needle agrees, it is already in the yard. The light went down that second day the way it goes down in the fall, fast at the end, the gold going to gray, going to nothing over maybe 40 minutes. And We watched it go from the kitchen with the gear all rigged and the cables run and my clever plan laid out and ready, and none of us said much. And at some point Ruth reached down for a dog that was not under the table because the dog was outside pacing, and she caught herself reaching for the dog that was not there, and she put her hand back in her lap. And that small thing, a woman reaching for a dog out of habit and finding the floor empty, is the last calm image I have of Cedar Creek before it came around the back of the house. And I do not know why that is the one that stayed, the empty floor under the table where the hand went, but it is, and I have learned to stop asking why the mind keeps what it keeps. The second night we set the trap, and I use that word now with the full knowledge of who the trap was for. My idea. I want that on the record, because so little of what went wrong was any one person's fault, and this part was mine. I had reasoned it out through the day like a case, like a puzzle, the way I reasoned everything. The thing came down the slope a little further every night. The thing did whatever it did to electronics, drove the meters to the pin, killed lights, fogged film when it was near. So, I reasoned, we could not catch it on our gear near the house because our gear died when it got close. But what if we did not try to catch the thing? What if we caught its approach? Put the cameras and the recorders down the slope, at the fence, at the circle where the thing started, and ran the cables all the way back to the house, to a spot far enough from the thing's path that the gear would still be working when the thing passed the sensors. Catch it at the top of the slope on tape while it was still 400 yards from the equipment that was recording it, use the distance as the shield. It was, I thought, genuinely clever. It was the kind of idea that got a case a number. And the flaw in it, the flaw I did not see, because I did not want to see it, was that to set it up, someone had to go up to the circle, to the tree line, to the exact 3 feet of dry ground where the thing stood, and place a camera there, and run a cable back in the dark, because the thing only came in the dark, and there was no version of my clever plan where a man did not stand in the thing's own spot in the dark with his back to the trees. I knew that. I knew it when I drew the plan out for Wade and Ruth at the kitchen table on a paper sack. And I let Wade be the one to go up, because Wade was better with the cameras and the cable. That was the reason we gave. That was the true and sufficient reason. Wade could seat a camera and run a line in the dark faster and cleaner than I could by half. And it is also true that some animal part of me was glad it was going to be Wade at the tree line and me at the house. And I have to hold both of those, the true reason and the ugly one, because they were both in me when I let my best friend walk up that slope in the dark with a camera under his arm. We waited for full dark. Ruth did not like the plan and said so once, flatly, and then helped, because there was no better plan, and she wanted it over. Wade and I ran the main cable up the slope in the last light, spooling it out from the house along the fence line, and we set the first camera at the leaning post, pointing into the circle, and Wade went the last few yards into the tree line alone to seat it while I stood at the fence paying out cable, and I watched his big shape move in the dark under the first trees, unhurried, careful, the little tuck at the corner of his mouth, doing the work. And he got the camera seated and pointed, and he backed out of the trees, and he said, "That's got it." And we walked the cable back down to the house together in the dark. And I did not know, we did not know, that the thing had already changed its pattern, that everything we had reasoned out was built on 3 nights of a pattern the thing had no obligation to keep, and that the whole clever architecture of using the distance as a shield assumed the thing would come from the trees, from the top, from the circle, the way it always had, down the slope toward the house, into the cameras. From far to near, we had built the entire plan on the thing coming from up there. It did not come from up there. The meter started climbing at 9:40 by my watch, which I noted because I noted everything, sitting at Ruth's kitchen table with the little bank of monitors we had rigged, the video feed from the slope cameras glowing gray-green, the field meter by my hand, the recorder reels turning. The meters climbed, and I felt the old excitement come up in me. Here it comes, right on schedule, and I keyed the radio to Wade, who was posted at the mudroom door at the back of the house with the still camera in case it came close, and I said, "It's starting, watch the feeds," and Wade clicked back 2 times, his acknowledge, and I looked at the video monitors for the slope, for the fence, for the circle, waiting for the dark shape to assemble at the top of the frame the way I had planned it, the thing walking down into our trap, and the slope stayed empty. The meters climbed and climbed, past half, past 2/3, the needle going where it only went when the thing was close, when it was in the yard, and the slope cameras showed nothing. Empty gold grass going gray-green up to an empty fence, and I remember the exact moment the floor went out of me, the moment my clever plan turned over and showed me its underside, because the meter by my hand hit the far pin hard against the stop. The thing is here, the thing is right here, and every camera pointed up the slope showed nothing at all, because the thing was not up the slope. The wrongness was strongest right where I sat. It had not come down from the trees. It had come around. It was not in front of the house where all our cameras pointed. It was behind it. It was at the back. It was at the mudroom. It was where Wade was. And every light in Ruth's house went out at once. I went for the back of the house in the dark. I did not decide to. My legs had me up and moving before the thought finished. Through the black kitchen, into the black hall, my hands out, Ruth somewhere behind me saying my name and then not saying it. The house was full dark, every light dead, and the dark had the ozone smell in it, thick now, the after-lightning smell, and under it the other smell, the one I still cannot name, cold and mineral and wrong, the smell the circle in the woods brought indoors. I hit the wall at the end of the hall with my shoulder and found the mudroom door frame and came through it, and there was a little light here, gray, from the window and the back door, the yard beyond it, and in that gray I saw Wade. He was at the back door. He had it open. He was standing in the open door with the still camera up to his face, and he was taking pictures, the flash going, and each time the flash went, it lit the yard white for an instant and then took it away. And in the instance of white, I saw what was in the yard, and I both saw it and did not really see it, because both are true. It was close. It was at the bottom of the steps, a few feet from Wade, and it was tall, taller than the door frame, so that it had to bend, and it was bent, folded down and forward to bring itself to the level of the door of Wade. And in the white of the flash, it was the wrong color, a gray that was not skin and not cloth, and it was the wrong proportion. The arms too long for where the joints were, the head too far forward on the neck, and the parts of it were almost the parts of a man, and not one of them was the thing itself, exactly as Ruth had said, and almost a person built in the dark by something that had only heard one described. That is what the flash showed, and what I actually saw, what my eye actually held, was almost nothing, because you could not hold it, it slid, it would not stay in the frame of the eye, and the flash would give it to me whole for 1/100th of a second, and then the dark would take it, and I would be left with only the after image and the certainty was the worst of it, the certainty that it was reaching for Wade, that the two long arms were coming up and forward, slow, folding out toward him the way a thing unfolds that has all the time in the world. I yelled his name. I know I yelled it because Ruth told me after, though I do not remember the sound. And Wade, my Wade, did the thing that was most himself in the last clear second I had of him whole. He did not run. He put his own body sideways into the door frame, filling it, blocking it, putting himself between the open door and the dark house where Ruth and I were. And he brought the camera up one more time and put the flash right into the front of the thing, right into the almost face of it, close, hand's reach, and in that last flash the thing was lit full on for the only time, and its face, God, its face was the almost worst part, because it was almost a face. It had the places a face has, and where the eyes should have thrown the light back, the way anything alive throws light back, there was nothing. No shine, no wet, two places that were almost eyes that took the flash and gave nothing back, holes that the light went into and did not come out of, and then the flash died and the dark came down and Wade was still in the door and the thing came into him. I did not see it clearly. That is the truth, and it is also a mercy I have never stopped being grateful for. What I have is sounds. The camera hitting the floor. Wade's breath going out of him all at once. Not a scream. Wade did not scream. A grunt, the sound a man makes when a great weight comes down on him without warning. And then the sound of him going back and down into the mudroom, into me, because I had reached him by then. I had my hands on his coat and I was hauling him back into the house, away from the door with everything I had, and there was resistance. There was a moment where I was pulling Wade one way and something on the other side of him was pulling the other way, and Wade was the rope. And I set my feet on Ruth's mud room floor and I pulled my best friend against the strength of the thing at the door, and I screamed for Ruth, and Ruth came. Ruth was there. Ruth had the rifle, and Ruth did not fire it into the dark where her friends were. She did the smart thing, the country thing. She fired it up once into the air, out the door, over the whole of it. That flat, enormous crack of a .30-30 in a closed yard. And whether it was the shot or whether the thing was simply done, whether it had gotten what it reached for, the pull on the other end of Wade let go all at once. And I went over backward with Wade on top of me, and Ruth slammed the back door and threw the bolt, and stood with her back against it and the rifle across her chest, breathing, and the meter somewhere on the kitchen table, I heard it. The needle came off the pin and dropped, and the lights came back on. The lights came back on, and I was on the floor of a rancher's mudroom under the weight of Wade Corliss, and there was blood, so much of it, warm, coming through his coat and onto me, onto the floor. More blood than I had ever seen, and I have never seen that much since. And Wade was breathing. He was breathing in a way I did not like, fast and shallow and wet, and his eyes were open and moving and finding me. And his hand came up and got a fistful of my shirt, and he pulled me down close, and he said into my ear, in a voice that was mostly air, he said, "Don't let them," and then he could not finish it. And I said, "Don't let them what? Don't let them what, Wade?" And he could not. He had spent what he had on those two words, "Don't let them." And I have spent 25 years not knowing how that sentence ended, and filling in the blank with every terrible possibility. Don't let them take me. Don't let them tell you it didn't happen. Don't let them bury it. Don't let them. And the true horror of it, the thing I carry, is that within a day I would understand that every single one of those endings was the right one, that they all came true, that whatever Wade meant, the them he meant, did all of it. Ruth was already at the scanner and the phone. Ruth, who did not fall apart, who had never in her life fallen apart, called it in, and she did it right. She gave the county the road and the mile and the nature of it. Man down, bleeding bad, animal attack, because what else do you say? And then she came back and knelt on the floor across Wade's body from me and put her flat, hard hands on the worst of the blood and pressed the way you press. And she said to me, "Over him, look at me, he is breathing, keep him breathing, talk to him." And I talked to him. I talked to Wade Corliss on the floor of that mudroom for the 50 minutes it took the county to come up 11 miles of county, 9 in the dark, and I do not remember one word I said. I have tried for years to get back even one sentence of what I said to my friend on that floor, with my hands doing nothing useful and Ruth's hands doing all the useful there was, and it is gone. That 50 minutes is a hole in me, the way the missing time is a hole in the others, except mine is not from the thing. Mine is just from fear, the ordinary human fear that erases you while you are inside it, and maybe that is a mercy too. Maybe the mind will not give a man back the 50 minutes he knelt over the ruin of the person he loved most, saying words that did not matter into a face that was already, though I did not know it yet, no longer entirely going to come back. What I have kept is not words. I have kept the cold of the linoleum coming up through my knees. I have kept the sound of Wade's breathing, the wet catch in it. I have kept the way Ruth's forearms shook with the steady pressure and never once let up. And I have kept the phone off its hook on the counter above us, the dispatcher's small tinny voice coming out of it into that dark kitchen, saying, "Stay with me," saying, "They are coming," saying, "Keep the pressure on." A woman 2 counties away doing the one thing anyone could do, which was keep a voice in the room. And I remember thinking, in the one clear thought I can retrieve from that whole 50 minutes, that the voice on the phone and Ruth's hands were the same thing, were the whole of what human beings can actually do against a thing like this, which is not stop it, never stop it, but keep a voice in the room and keep the pressure on and refuse with your whole shaking body to let go of the person before the help comes. And that this refusing is not nothing. It is not nothing. It is the only thing we have, and it kept Wade alive. And I have built the rest of my life on the smallness and the enormousness of that. A voice in the room and a pair of hands that would not let up. Ruth kept her hands in the blood the whole time, and did not move them, and did not speak except once, near the end, when the first far sound of a siren came down off the county road, and what she said, looking at the black window over her sink, not to me, was, "It is still out there." And I looked up at the window, and the meter on the table was dead flat, and the yard light was burning steady, and I knew she did not mean the thing. She meant it was still true. It had happened, and it was still out there in the dark being a thing that had happened. And no siren coming up that road was going to change what was standing in her yard 20 minutes ago. And she was right. And she was more right than she knew. Because the thing coming up that road in the dark was not only an ambulance. The county came. And then the county was not enough. And they called for a helicopter. And there is a long piece in the middle here that I live through in the flat gray way you live through the worst hours, where nothing feels real and everything is very loud, and I am not going to draw it out. Wade went out on the helicopter to the trauma center in the city, 200 miles, and I was not allowed to go with him, and Ruth drove me in the Ford to the hospital there through the rest of that night. 4 hours, neither of us saying much. The compass Wade had clipped to his belt sitting on the dash between us because a paramedic had unclipped it and handed it to me along with Wade's wallet and his wedding band chain, the personal effects, the things they take off a man before they open him up. And I held the compass in my lap the whole drive and watched the needle swing as we came down out of the high country, north, steady, true, doing the one honest, simple thing it was built to do. And I thought, this is the only piece of gear we brought that never once lied to me, and Wade knew it, and I teased him for it, and I did not cry until that thought, and then I did, in the passenger seat of my dying friend's truck, with his compass in my hands, and Ruth drove and let me and did not say a word, which was the kindest thing she could have done, and she knew it. Wade lived. It has to sit here, plainly, before the rest, because the rest is dark, and I do not want you carrying a dead man through it, when the truth is worse and stranger than dead. Wade Corliss lived. He was in surgery 11 hours that first day, and more surgery after, and the wounds, which I saw only once, and will not describe beyond this, were not the wounds of any animal that lives in those woods, or any woods. They did not go the way teeth and claws go. They went wrong. They went the way everything about the thing went, almost like an animal attack, and not the thing itself. And the surgeons did not have a category for them, and I watched 3 different doctors try to make my friend's body fit the word bear, and fail. And it was in that failure, in the gap between what the doctors were looking at and what they were willing to write down, that the men in the clean cars found their opening, because a thing that will not fit the official word is a thing that needs an official word supplied, and they came to supply it. The first day at the hospital was the longest day of my life, and almost nothing happened in it, which is what the worst days are. They are long stretches of nothing, with the whole weight of everything pressing down on the nothing. Wade was behind doors I could not go through. Ruth sat with me for the first hours and then had to drive back. 300 head, they do not stop. And she held my arm in both her hands before she left. Hard, the way she pressed the blood. And she said, "He is strong." And she said, "You did not do this." Which was a thing I needed to hear more than I knew, because I had already begun the long work of deciding it was my fault, my plan, my letting Wade go to the trees. And Ruth looked at me and told me flat that I did not do this, that the thing did this. And then she drove 6 hours home alone in the dark up the road it lived on, which is the bravest ordinary thing I ever watched a person do, and I did not appreciate it enough at the time because I was drowning. I did a thing in those waiting hours that I have not told you, and it matters, because it is the seam the men in the clean cars slid into. There was a 1-hour photo place in a strip mall across from the hospital, the kind there used to be, and on the second morning, sleepless, half out of my mind, I took the first roll of film from the trap cameras, the roll from the fence, from the circle, the one I was surest had caught something, and I walked it across the road, and I paid a teenager to develop it while I waited, standing in that bright, chemical-smelling shop with its posters of babies and sunsets, because I needed with my whole body one true image, one frame of proof, that the thing that took my friend was real and outside of me. And the kid ran the roll and came back to the counter with a strange look in the envelope, and every print in it was gray. Fogged corner to corner. Nothing. I stood at that counter and went through them one at a time, 24 gray rectangles, and the kid said, "Sorry man, must have got exposed, happens." And I wanted to grab him and say it did not get exposed. I loaded it in a bag with my own hands, but I just took the gray prints and the gray negatives and walked back across the road. And I understand now that the men in the clean cars did not fog that film. The thing fogged that film. The thing unmade the record the way it unmade everything. And that the men in the cars simply knew it would. Knew before I did. Because they had developed 1,000 rolls like it in 1,000 towns. And so when the one who talked sat down beside me and told me my film was fogged and I already knew it was fogged, it was not a threat. It was worse than a threat. It was a man telling me the weather, telling me a law of nature he had known for decades, and I had just learned across the road, that this thing cannot be photographed, cannot be taped, cannot be filed, that it comes with its own erasure built in, and that all they had to do, the men, all they had ever had to do, was wait for the thing to erase the proof and then arrive to erase the man. They came the second day, to the hospital, and I knew them the moment I saw them cross the waiting room, because they were the wrong kind of clean, the same wrong clean as the cars I would see later at Ruth's, pressed and neutral and dustless, in a room full of exhausted people in day-old clothes, and there were 2 of them here, one who talked and one who did not, and the one who talked sat down beside me in the waiting room chairs without asking, and called me by my name, my full name, which was not on anything I had given the hospital, and he said he was sorry about my friend, and he said it with exactly as much weather in his voice as Ruth had in hers, which is to say none, except that in Ruth the flatness was a lifetime of country, and in this man it was a tool. It was the flatness of a man for whom my worst night was a Tuesday, and a form to be closed. He had a folder. Of course he had a folder. I, of all people, understood the folder. And he opened it on his knee, and I saw, upside down, that it already had things in it, that it had my name, and Wade's name, and I swear this, a photograph of Ruth's north fence, an aerial photograph, the circle, the dry circle in the trees, shot from above before we ever drove up County 9, which meant they had been watching that spot from the sky before Ruth ever wrote me her 4 sentences, which meant this was not the first time, which meant they already knew, and the knowing was older than us, and we had walked into the middle of a thing that had a folder before it had us. I have it near word for word, because I have run it in my head 10,000 times, and it went like this. He said, "What happened to your friend was an animal attack. A bear, a big one, a boar bear, denning late, provoked, at close range in the dark. That is what happened, and it is what happened because it is the only thing that happened that a doctor can treat, and a county can file, and a family can grieve." He said, "You are going to want to tell people the other thing. I understand that men in your position always want to tell the other thing, and I am here, out of a courtesy you will not appreciate for some years, to explain to you why you are not going to." He said, "You have no film. Every frame you shot is fogged, and you know it is fogged, because you have already developed the first roll and seen it. You have no tape, the reels are wiped. You will find that out when you play them. You have 2 field meters that a first-year physics student will tell you have dead batteries. You have a rancher who has been alone on that place too long, and a partner who cannot speak for himself and may not for a long time. And you have a notebook." He looked at me when he said the notebook, and I understood that they had been through the truck, that they had been through everything, that they knew about the notebook and had decided it did not matter. A scared man's handwriting, and he was right. It did not matter. It has never mattered to anyone but me. He said, "You have a story and no proof, and the story, if you tell it, does one thing and one thing only. It makes you the man whose friend got mauled because the 2 of you were out in the dark chasing ghosts, and it makes his little girl the daughter of a fool, and it makes the rancher a crazy old woman, and it changes nothing about what is or is not standing in those trees, because that," he said, "and this is the part I have never gotten out of my skull, that is not yours to know about, and it is not ours to explain to you. It is only ours to keep the lid on, and we are good at the lid. We have had a long time to get good at it, and we are going to be good at it here, with you or over you, and you would do your friend more good deciding which." And then he said the thing that was almost kind and was worse for it. He closed the folder and he stood up and he looked down at me and he said, "Go home, bury it, not because it is a lie, because it is true, and true is the one thing we cannot let it be." And he and the one who never spoke walked out of that waiting room, and I sat there with Wade in surgery and Ruth getting coffee and no film and no tape and dead meters and a notebook that did not matter. And I understood that Wade's last clear words to me, "Don't let them," had already lost. They were already here. They had been here before we came. "Don't let them" was a thing my friend gasped out on a mudroom floor about men who had a photograph of the circle before Ruth ever picked up a pen. I did not decide to obey them. That matters to me even if it matters to no one else. I did not decide anything. There was simply no lever to pull. I called a reporter I knew once, a week later, from a payphone because I had gotten paranoid about my own line by then, and I got 3 sentences into it before I heard how it sounded coming out of my own mouth. Ghost hunters. A shape in the trees. No film, no tape. My friend cannot corroborate, and I hung up before the reporter had to be the one to end it. The man in the clean car had been exactly right about the shape of the thing if I tried to tell it, which is its own kind of horror, that they understood the true account would sound precisely as insane as a false one, that truth and lie wore the same face here, and that the only difference between me and every crank who ever called that reporter was that I was right, and being right, it turns out, feels identical from the inside to being a fool, and looks identical from the outside. And the men in the cars had built their whole long quiet operation on that identical, on the fact that the truth about the thing in the trees is unfalsifiable and unprovable in the same breath, and a thing that cannot be proven or disproven is a thing that can be buried forever by simply, calmly, declining to dig. So it went in as an animal attack. There is a county file, and I have seen it, and it says bear. There is a hospital record, and it says the same. Wade's insurance paid on it as a bear, which is the blackest joke in the whole business, that the lie was load-bearing all the way down into the man's medical billing, that somewhere there is an adjuster who closed a claim on a boar-bear denning late and never knew he was a small load-bearing brick in a wall built by men in clean cars, and that the wall worked. The wall is still working. It worked so well that I am sitting here 25 years later telling you the true thing, in a form I have to swear up front is fiction, so that it can be told at all, which is the last and best trick of the lid, that they did not even have to keep telling the lie. They only had to make the truth unspeakable, except as a story, and a story is a thing you are allowed to not believe. Wade came home after 4 months, and what came home was worse than dead. He lived, and he healed as much as he was going to, and he walked with a cane the rest of his life, and could not do the fine work with his hands anymore. The motors, the cameras, the things he loved, and all that was terrible, and all that was survivable, and none of it is the thing. The thing is that Wade did not come back. His body came back. A man came back in his body, and that man was almost Wade. He had Wade's memories, most of them, and Wade's voice, close, and Wade's slow way of reading with his lips moving a little. And he was kind to me, and he loved his daughter. And he was, in every way you could point at and name, Wade Corliss. And he was an almost... I am the only one who knew it, because I am the only one who knew Wade the way you have to know a man to catch an almost. And I caught it the first hour he was home, in 100 things too small to be any one thing. The beat too long before he laughed. The way his eyes would go to the tree line out any window and stay a half-second past where a man's eyes go. The way he would sometimes, doing nothing, standing at a counter, go completely still. Still the way the meter needle was still when the thing had left, empty still, gone still, and then come back into himself and not know he had been anywhere. I never told him. What would I have told him? I never told his wife or his daughter or anyone, because it was the one thing I could not file, could not prove, could not even fully hold. The sense that the thing at the door had reached into my friend and taken some small central true thing out of him and left the almost behind. The way it had taken Cole entirely and left nothing. Except with Wade it had been interrupted, Ruth's rifle, my hands on his coat, and so it had only gotten part of him, and the part it left was almost all of him, almost, and I loved the almost. I did. I loved what came home in Wade's body for the 19 years he lived in it, and I grieved my actual friend the whole time, both at once, a man mourning someone who was sitting across the table, asking him to pass the salt, and if you want to know what the thing at Cedar Creek really does, what it is really for, I think it is that. I do not think it kills. I think it takes the one central thing, and I think out in whatever dark it comes from, that central thing is the crop. And the bodies it leaves or does not leave are just what is left in the field after the harvest. And that is the closest I have ever come to understanding its motive. And I understand it not at all, which the man in the clean car told me was correct, that it was not mine to understand. And I have hated few things more than being told a true thing by that man. I should tell you what became of Ruth, because she is the one who called it in, and the one who fired the shot, and the one who kept her hands in my friend's blood for 50 minutes without being asked. And she deserves better than to fall out of the account, the way people fall out of accounts, quietly, off the edge of what the teller has room for. She did not fall out of mine. I made sure of it. The men in the clean cars went to Ruth too. I know because she told me the one time we spoke after, on the phone, maybe 6 weeks along, when Wade was still in the city full of tubes and I was staying in a motel near the trauma center, living on vending machines and not sleeping. Ruth called the motel, which meant she had tracked down which motel, which was very like her, and she told me in her flat voice that 2 men had come up County 9 in a car with no dust on it, and had sat at her kitchen table, the same table, and had explained to her about the bear. And Ruth, who had shot and eaten every bear that ever gave her trouble, and knew a bear the way she knew her own hands, had listened to a man in a press suit tell her a bear had done that to Wade Corliss in her yard. And she had let him finish because she was a woman who let a man finish, And then she had told him in the flat voice that she had lived on that place 60 years, and she would say what she pleased about her own dark, and the man had been ready for that. Of course he had. And he had not threatened her, she said. He had done something worse. He had been sad for her. He had told her that a woman alone at her age, running a marginal operation, telling a story about a thing in the trees, was a woman whose neighbors would start to talk about whether she ought to still be out there alone, whether it was safe, whether somebody ought to see about getting her somewhere with people to look after her. And he had said it gently, the way you would say it if you meant it kindly, and Ruth had understood exactly what it was, which was the whole machinery of a person's independent life held up in front of her, and the hand laid lightly on it, and she had gone quiet, and the man had left, and Ruth Amsden, who was not afraid of the dark on her own place until the thing came, and was not afraid of the thing enough to stop wanting to know what it was made afraid, finally, all the way, by a man in a clean car who never raised his voice, because he had found the one thing she could not shoot or bury, which was the threat of being taken off her land by people who would say it was for her own good. She stayed. I want that known. She stayed on the place, and she never spoke of it again to anyone but me, and she signed whatever they put in front of her. And she went on running her 300 head with her flat, hard hands until she was too old, and then, she told me in a letter years later, she sold the place, which she had sworn she never would, to a timber concern. And she did not say, and I did not ask, whether the timber concern was as clean and dustless as the cars, whether the lid included the quiet buying up of the ground itself so that no one would ever run cattle in that upper pasture again, and no dog would ever again refuse the north fence. But I have my suspicion, and my suspicion is that the circle of dry ground in the trees above Cedar Creek is on nobody's land now that anybody could find, that it has been folded into some holding company's map, the way our whole story was folded into the word bear, and that if you drove up County 9 today, which you cannot, because County 9 is not a real road, you would find a gate and a sign and no way in. Ruth died in 2009 of being old, in a bed, in a facility after all, though a good one, near her nephew. And I drove the 6 hours to stand at the back of the room, and there were maybe 11 people there, and I did not speak, because what would I have said? That this small flat woman had once fired a .30-30 over the head of a thing from somewhere else to save a man she had known 9 hours, and had kept her hands in his blood, and had been the truest witness I ever had, and had been broken at last, not by the thing, but by our own kind. I did not say it. I put my hand on the box on the way out, the way Ruth used to put her hand on the dog, flat, once, and I left. Sal, the dog, the one that stopped eating. Ruth wrote me that Sal never would go up that slope again as long as she lived, and died 2 years after Cedar Creek, and that Pete, the other one, got over it, went back to being a dog, and that she had come to think the difference between the two dogs was the difference between people too. That some got over the thing and went back to being themselves, and some stopped eating and pointed at the dark for the rest of their lives, and that she did not know which she was and did not expect to find out until the end. That is the most Ruth ever said about her own inside in a letter about a dog, and I have kept the letter in the empty folder with the notebook where subject 9 should be. There were 19 years, and they were not only the horror I have made the almost sound like. They were 19 years of my friend's body walking around in the world doing good, and the man who lived in it was gentle, and I owe him the years the same way I owe Ruth the account. He went back to work, not the cameras, he could not do the cameras, but he took a job at a parts counter at an auto supply in his town, and he was good at it, because the almost had left him his whole knowledge of engines, even as it took whatever it took, and men would come in with a problem they could not describe, and Wade would stand at the counter and listen with his lips moving a little, and then reach behind him without looking and put the right part on the counter, and they came back for that. They came back for the big, slow-bearded man who knew what they needed before they did, and he made a life on that counter, He raised Reese. That is the thing I hold on to hardest. Whatever the thing took, it left him able to raise his daughter, and he raised her, drove her to the games and the practices and the recitals, taught her to drive in the auto supply lot on Sundays, walked her into her first day of high school, and stood in the lot after until she was all the way through the doors, and she grew up steady and funny and quick, and she thought her father was a quiet man who had been mauled by a bear when she was 6 and walked with a cane because of it, and that is what she still thinks, and I have decided that is a mercy and not a lie, or that it is the one lie of the men in the clean cars that I have chosen to keep for my own reasons, because the truth would give Reese Corliss nothing but a hole where her father is, and she does not have a hole. She has a father, and he loved her. He almost loved her. I watched it love her for 19 years, and I will not take that from her to make myself feel honest. But I knew. Every year I knew a little more, and minded a little more, and hid it a little better. We stayed close, closer even, because I was the only one who could see it, and so I was the only one he was. In some way he never had words for. Fully safe around. The way you are safe around the one person who knows the worst thing. We would sit on his porch, on the 2 days a week Reese was with her mother, in the early years, before Reese was grown, and drink 1 beer each. Slow, the way Wade did everything now, and we would not talk about it. And every so often, 3 or 4 times a year maybe, in the middle of nothing, Wade would go still, empty, still, gone, still, the beer in his hand and his eyes open and nobody home behind them for a second, 2 seconds, 5, and I learned not to say anything, learned to just wait, and he would come back into his own face like a light coming up in a window, and he would look at me and know. In those moments he would know, just for a second he would know that he had been gone somewhere and that I had seen it. And once, only once, in maybe the 12th year, he came back from one of those and looked at me and said, "Quiet, where do I go?" And I did not have an answer, and I did not pretend to, and he said, "I go somewhere, Danny. I can feel that I go somewhere. I never remember it, but I come back tired like I have been somewhere." And then he looked out at his own tree line, his eyes going that half second too long past where a man's eyes stop, and he said the thing that I think about every single day of my life. He said, "I think part of me still lives there. I think it left most of me here, and took a little of me there, and the little of me that is there is homesick, and that is what I feel when I go still. I feel the homesick part, and I do not know which place it is homesick for." And then he blinked and it passed, and he asked me if I wanted another beer, and I said yes. And I sat on that porch and drank a second beer. I did not want next to a man who had just told me that a piece of him was living in the dark. The thing came from homesick, and I did the only thing there was to do, which was love him and pass him the salt, and never once let him see that it was the worst thing I had ever heard, because he had enough to carry without carrying mine too. He died in 2017 of a heart thing, quick, in his sleep, and the doctor said it was ordinary, and it probably was. A big man's heart giving out at 50. It happens, and I have chosen to believe it was ordinary, because the alternative that the homesick part finally pulled the rest of him home is a thing I cannot hold and stay standing. Reese called me before she called almost anyone, and I drove through the night to be there, and I helped carry him, and at the service I sat with the family, because Reese put me there, in the front, and she leaned over during the service and whispered to me that her dad had told her more than once that if anything ever happened to him I was to be given the metal box from his closet, and after, she gave it to me, and in it was Wade's half of everything, the photos and his notes from the old cases in his blocky hand, and Cole's boot, the one boot they found in 1984, which Wade had kept for 33 years and never told me he had, and the compass, my compass now, the one that never lied. It is on my desk. The needle points north. I check it sometimes for no reason, the way you touch a bruise, and it is always right, and it is the only thing from Cedar Creek that is always right, and I have left instructions that it go to Reese when I die, with a letter, and in the letter I have written the true thing, sealed, for her to open or burn as she chooses, because she is grown now, and it is hers to decide whether she wants the whole or the father, and that is a choice I have finally understood a person has to be allowed to make for themselves, after a lifetime of being a man who wanted to make everyone file everything. I have learned to leave one folder sealed and let someone else decide whether to open it. That is the only thing the whole business ever taught me that I am glad to know. The pattern I found out about by accident, years later, and it is the last piece, and then I am nearly done. I met a man at a thing, a support group of a kind, years after, the kind of room where people who have been near the unexplained end up when the ordinary rooms stop holding them, and I was not going to talk. I never talked, but a man across the circle told a story about his sister, in another state, a whole other part of the country, high desert, nothing like our wet timber, a different country entirely, and it was our story. It was Cedar Creek in a different key, lights that died when the thing came, gear that failed, a shape at a tree line that was the wrong height, almost the shape of a person, a family member taken, or half taken, hurt in a way the doctors made fit a word that did not fit, and then after the cars, the clean cars, the folder, the calm man, the animal tack file, the lid. He described the man from the cars, and it was not the same man. It could not have been too many years. But it was the same flatness, the same courtesy that was not kindness, the same folder that already had the aerial photograph in it before anyone called anyone. And I sat in that circle, and my skin went cold from the scalp down, the one time in this whole account I will spend that particular sensation, because I understood that we were not special, that Cedar Creek was not an event, it was an instance, that this thing, or these things, had been coming down at tree lines all over the country for longer than anyone I would ever meet had been alive, taking the one central thing out of one person at a time in lonely places, and that behind it, following it, cleaning up after it with folders and clean cars and the word bear, was something human, an operation, patient and quiet and very old and very good at the lid, that did not stop the thing and did not explain the thing and did not, as far as I could ever tell, even want to stop it, but only managed it, only kept the lid on it, county by county, family by family, instance by instance, for reasons I was told to my face were not mine to know. And I never got the man's name across the circle. We did not do names in that room, and I never saw him again, and I have wondered ever since how many of us there are, the ones who were near it, and lived, and were buried alive under the word bear, sitting in circles all over the country, not using our names. Each of us certain we are carrying the only copy of a thing that is in fact printed in an edition of thousands, all of us made into liars by the truth, which is the cruelest use of the truth I have ever heard of, and the men in the cars did it on purpose, and they are very good at it. There is nowhere for a thing like this to end. There is only the place a man stops, and this is where I stop. I kept the empty folder. It was the first thing I said, and it is the thing to close on, because it is the truest object I own. In my green cabinet, between Subject 8, which was a farmhouse in the next county over, where a family heard a second set of footsteps on their stairs for a winter, and then did not, and the tab where Subject 9 should be, there is a folder, and the folder is labeled in my own hand, and the label says only Cedar Creek, and inside it there is no case, because they took the case, they took the film and the tape and the meters, and even, I am fairly sure, the developed proof of the fogging, which is proof of nothing except that there was nothing, which is the perfect crime, to leave a man holding evidence that the evidence was destroyed. Inside the folder there is a notebook that does not matter, and a rancher's letter about 2 dogs, and nothing else, because I never gave Subject 9 a number. I could not. A number was the thing I did to make a case real, and filed and held at arm's length, and this one would not be held at arm's length. This one got in. It got all the way in. It took my best friend and left it almost in his chair for 19 years. And it made me a liar by telling me the truth. And you do not file that. You cannot number that. That lives in you at the exact distance the number was invented to prevent, which is no distance at all. So the folder is empty. The number is skipped. And a man who built his whole self on the belief that a thing becomes real when you write it down and give it a number has had to live for 25 years with the one realest thing that ever happened to him sitting in an empty folder with no number on it, unfileable, unclosable, true. There is a case number for it, though. Not mine, theirs. Once, years on, through a person I will not describe in any way that could find them, I got to see one page of what the men in the clean cars keep, and I will only say that their files are not empty. Their files are very full, and that their system is not letters in green cabinets. It is a long string of digits, and that the string of digits that meant Cedar Creek, that meant Wade and Ruth and me in the dry circle and the thing at the door, was when I finally saw the thing that stood where my skipped number should be, Incident 49117. I wrote it on the inside cover of the notebook. That does not matter. In the empty folder, the one place a number for Cedar Creek exists in my hand, and I put it there not because it makes the thing real. I am done believing a number makes a thing real, but because I wanted, once, to be the one who wrote it down, and not them. They wrote everything down. They wrote it down before we ever came. They had the circle photographed from the sky. They have the whole country cataloged, incident by incident, tree line by tree line, in a system built to hold what happened and never let it out. My folder is empty, and theirs is full, and I have come to think that is the whole shape of it. That is the country I actually live in, one where the true accounts are the empty folders in the hands of broken men, and the full folders are held by the ones who make sure the true accounts stay empty. And there is no reporter, no camera, no needle, no number that changes that. There is only, at the very end, an old man at a desk with a compass that still points north, and a folder with nothing in it and everything in it, checking the one true instrument for no reason, the way you touch a bruise, to see if it still hurts. It still hurts. The needle still points north, and somewhere up a road that is not on any map, in a season that comes around too slow for one life to see the whole of it, the dry circle in the trees is waiting to go bad again, and when it does, there will be a light that dies, and a dog that will not go to the fence, and a person who wants to know. And then the cars, the wrong kind of clean, coming up the dirt in the dark, with the folder already full, and the word already chosen, and the lid, the long patient lid, coming down.